So had an early start today, the 31st of July, and back to the schedule that we were on before. From based on my opinion, or based on my desire, we went back to the second group because we left last time with this sort of promise that we were going to come back, and I wanted to stick to that. So we did end up going there. Had a new driver today for the first time, so that was kind of funny. And I'll describe a typical motorcycle ride later, but this guy is not. His motorcycle's not quite. The shocks are a little bit worn out, I think, from carrying too much weight, so definitely felt a lot more of the impact hitting bumps and stuff like that. Also, he's confident but not really as skilled as our first driver. More confident than our second driver, but he also does this sort of like very awkward speed waddling thing through the sand, and we almost fell like one time, but made it out to the group by around I don't know, it must have been around 6 o'clock, and the one guy, the head guy, had already killed a dick, so I gotta see that and do a quick drawing of that before they cut into it. And the first thing that they cooked was the liver, heart, and lungs on the coals, and they gave me some of the liver that was pretty tasty. And it was also just interesting to see how they use the brush, a big pile of brush with a bunch of chopped sea salt plants laid flat on it as sort of like their cutting board slash table, for working on the animal to keep it up out of the sand. So that seemed like a very creative solution there. And I did some nature journaling of that whole process. So it's possible to see that there. But it was on our drive. We also we started hunting around maybe 6:30 or 7. There was a couple bird misses, and a couple shots taken on birds and a couple misses. One shot taken on a mouse scurrying into a gully, and that was a miss. There were kids on their way to school in blue uniforms, and so I found out that they go to the school. I've been seeing this building on our drive, a blue building, and so that's the school. Let's see, it was a little bit cloudy, and there was even a little bit of drizzle as we headed out in the morning, and there was some fresh little termite mound digs, the small ones that look like instant coffee. A little bit later, one mouse bird, or whatever those birds are with the long tail and the cockatiel like crest, got shot. The driver harvested some toothbrush bush, and him and Zachariah were both cleaning their teeth as we walked, which was kind of funny. I was taking notes. They were cleaning their teeth with this toothbrush bush, and all the Hadza guys were either carrying cigarettes, hand-rolled cigarettes, or they were hunting, or both at the same time. The light was really amazing, so I took a lot of photos. It was sort of, the sun was coming in underneath these storm clouds, or mild storm clouds. Around 7:30, the kid got an arrow stuck in a tall acacia, so as he and another guy were trying to get it, the headman rolled a joint, and I got to make a coal with the huge hand drill onto the knife blade that has no handle on it now, and it was really a pleasure to use that hand drill. I mean, the thing is probably over a yard long, almost a yard and a half, and it's naturally hollow in the middle, and just really nice taper, and just really a joy to use it it produces dust pretty fast, and you get a really long run on it because of the length. So I was just super happy to be using that. Everybody smoked, and then they started testing out some of my different drills, and so it was just a fun process of playing with the equipment there, and testing different drills. And by 8 o'clock we were back on the trail, so just a 30-minute break. It was really funny today, as I kept track in my small notebook, just noticing how it almost seems like they're on a schedule. I mean, we started back like right at 8 o'clock, and it's just interesting, and the break being 30 minutes, that feels like there's a regularity to the flow of the schedule. And then just a little bit later, around a little bit after 8, there was a squirrel that got treed, and there was a lot of maneuvering around. It's very interesting. I want to do a little bit more in-depth analyses on the different prey animals and their tactics around cover. So their tactics around cover versus running, and how their strategies relate to the strategies that humans use to try to catch them. So, for example, the squirrel, they can't let it get into these trees that are more open, because in the trees that are more open, they run really fast. So they keep them in these viney trees, and the headman got a shot, and it was just like a perfect shot through all these branches, nailed the squirrel in the head. I also noticed around that time a very cool like inflorescence shooting out of the ground, and somewhat wilted but yellow, and it had many rolls of tubular flowers, and I'm assuming it's some type of parasitic plant because there was no above ground parts that I could find. The headman took a quick snuff break. He uses the powdered tobacco quite a bit. And another thing I noticed today, and I've been noticing that's been adding up over the days, is just the fact that they don't break very many arrows. Like the amount of times that they shoot into these heavy branches, the arrow goes flying, lands really far away in more rocks and more branches, they really don't get broken very much. They do wear down the tips, and I saw one that was broken on the back that looked like it maybe got stepped on, or it looked like it got torqued somehow. But other than that, the tip gets worn down and they resharpen it, but I haven't seen any broken arrows. Like if I had been shooting almost any of my carbon arrows, they would have been breaking. I would have broken a couple on these shots. So that's something that's really interesting to notice, just the durability of the Copia africana, which is the wood that they use for the arrow shafts. We saw a lot of the different agropastoralist groups today. I'm not sure, which tribe is which or any of that, but we saw, a couple people going to get water, donkey carts, and we saw 2 guys pushing these bicycles with huge sacks of corn on the back little stand or seat, the little extra seat thing on the back of the bike over the rear wheel. And they're those old, I think they're called Atlas bikes or something, where it's all metal, and you could hear it sort of clanking and stuff, and they're pushing these sacks that were like filled to the brim, like barely manageable for them to push up this hill. Zachary was saying they're probably 40-kilo sacks. They're taking them to the mill, which is a 30-kilometer trip one way. So just interesting to think about the importance of the mill. And I do hear the mill most days, mostly in the evening. I hear it start up. And just to think that people are storing their corn at home and then bringing it to the mill to grind. But also a good thing to add to that is the fact that I know that they don't necessarily grind all of the corn to eat it, because that one group where we stopped that one day, the food that they gave us was cooked corn and beans that had not been ground up. So now I'm sort of curious about culinary, like local culinary practices and traditions, and the necessity of, or not, of grinding corn and what that signifies. Also interesting to think about the fact that, I mean, I guess 550 or whatever years, 500, maybe they've had corn for 400 or so years, probably something like that, but it's not always been the staple. And just to notice the predominance of it, corn and sunflowers and beans, and they look like the pigeon pea. I'm not sure about the origins of pigeon pea, but the red bean, the corn, and the sunflowers are all New World crops. So interesting to think about the centrality of those New World crops here in the Old World. Let's see, around 823 there was more shots up into trees. They take lots of shots up into trees, so that's something interesting. Like, most of the shots today were up into trees, and so when considering the form that they use and the stance and the anchor point and the bow hand and all of that, it's important to realize that so many of the shots that they take are these angled up into tree shots, that the form that they use needs to reflect that, I think, because, for example, the form that I use, or of a more like Olympic style form, would probably not be functional if 80% of your shots or more were up into trees. There was around that time, another scramble for squirrels, and there was a whole process of searching for them and then chasing it out of the branches and then trying to stomp on it and trying to shake the branches to keep it from going into the areas where it could run really fast. Eventually it went into a log, and there was a little bit of time spent making sticks to try to get the squirrel out of the log. And I found two what looked like stashed digging sticks, the same type that I had seen made by the first group, stuck behind a tree. So interesting to notice that maybe they're stashing those, or it's maybe just disposable technology, but they didn't look very old. Eventually gave up on those squirrels, and while we were sitting there on the squirrel log, a guy drove by on the Sand River in the motorcycle, blasting music and carrying a big thing of water on the back of his motorcycle, and also using the sort of speed waddle technique through the sand, which looks like a good way to break your leg or twist it in a very awkward way. Let's see. There was some debate I had about some bird tracks I saw, and I'm curious about whether or not they're francolin or some kind of large dove. Around 8:32, abandoned the squirrel in the hollow log, and we saw a guy with 12 donkeys headed past the motorcycle guy in the opposite direction with empties. And so just considering different strategies for carrying water and transportation, and what those signify, or what is possible with those different technologies. Around 8:39, there was some more squirrels, and just interesting to notice how they give up once the squirrels move into the more open trees where they can move really fast. They basically don't even try shooting at them. So I came up with this thing that I want to create some type of visual explanation for, but this, not exactly a ratio, but the relationship between cover, the degree of cover or brush, the feeling of safety, to hide instead of running, or to freeze instead of running, related to the ability to shoot arrows through branches, and also from that, the arrow design. Just as I was thinking about doing some type of diagram displaying that concept, the kid blasted a squirrel out of the tree and retrieved a perfectly undamaged arrow. Then another guy got one in the Epe vine on the same kind of the vine that we ate the fruit from. And yeah, so interesting to think about the importance of a mixed cover situation. If all of it were open cover, then squirrels would be unhuntable, and if all of the cover were ideal for archery shooting, then they would probably be more likely to be their numbers would be more likely to be very depleted beyond, like the sustainable. Um, so the ratio of plant species and the availability of cover are both things that are essential for maintaining this style of food production system. And so when it comes to deforestation and overgrazing and clearing of land for agriculture, or cutting of trees for charcoal, or whatever's going on, all of those would really impact the viability of this food production system. Around 8:46, oh yeah, the headman got another one, so I think 3 squirrels total were shot at that time. And then around 8:46, we got to this spot where there was a big dam, and a big engineered dam, and I assumed that it was like not working because it was totally filled up with sand. But it turns out that I don't think it was really intended to be that type of dam. It was intended to be a place to create a reservoir for a well. And so there was a well in back of the dam in the sandy area, and it was an engineered well with like a metal pumping tube and all of that, like a closed well, like a modern closed well, but it was not functional. And so apparently I heard that it did work during the rainy season, but not during the dry season. And the paradoxical thing to me, or the sort of ironic thing that my brain immediately latched onto, was the fact that less than 100 yards behind that non-functioning metal and cement well, that was probably the product of some development program or aid program or not, NGO or something like that. Just behind it, 100 yards, there's all these primitive hand-dug wells, open pit wells, that our people are actually using for their water. So we walked around those for a while and got to look at them quite a bit, which was interesting. And one thing that Zachariah said is that the small wells work better during the dry season because they work even with a small amount of water, whereas the hand pump well needs a large amount of water for it to, the engineered well, for it to actually work. Let's see. Anyways, that was interesting to me, and to see all the different styles of wells. Some of them had carved steps so that you could go down into them. Some of them had like a water trough, a wooden water trough next to them where water could be placed for livestock. Some of them had acacia brush surrounding it to protect it, and supposedly, according to Zachariah, there are different families have different wells. And so it's interesting to me to see them because they look like pitfalls. They look dangerous, and they look like animals could easily fall into them and die in the water and thus poison the source of water. So it's interesting to notice that and to realize that people are depending on that as their source of water. And also the fact that they're all open and near each other means that, if someone wanted to mess with another family, they could throw stuff into the other family's wells. So there's this sort of like open system where you're vulnerable to your neighbors, but you probably also know everything that they do. So just an interesting sort of, shall we say, village like accountability system. So we started walking again, and it was just an epic landscape. It turned from this flat river into a steeper and steeper watershed with lots of incredible rosy quartz studded granite and black pepper salt and pepper speckled granite, and tall, these like 30-foot tall aloe plants and baobabs and candelabra euphorbia and umbrella acacia coming out of the rocks everywhere. And around 9 o'clock, we saw fresh baboon scat, and there was also a lot of those different berries, dried berries, and we reached a spot where there was a natural pool of water, and also right next to the natural pool of water there was a bunch of sand, like a little sand beach, and in that sand was a spot where baboons had dug for water. Yeah, and so the baboons were drinking water out of this little dig, and right next to that dig there was this big, gross, green-colored open water, with a huge cluster of mosquito larvae in it, and not even the baboons were drinking that, apparently. So interesting to see that baboons are digging holes in the sand to get fresh filtered water, and the little kid, not so little kid, redug out the baboon water hole and let it settle. And it was just interesting to notice, there was also fresh scat in this area too, and two of the guys, the headman and one other guy, split off and followed the scat and the sign to see if they could go after the baboons, and the rest of us stayed behind at the water. Interesting to notice the open water higher up the creek from the modern and the hand-dug pit wells further down. And the grain of this granite was tortured in the way that it was twisted around and folded over itself. It looked like swirls of ice cream or fat marbled meat. So we took a break there, and we were hanging out there. I did a little scene, painted a little scene. Around 10 a.m. We started back up again. The other guys rejoined us. There were some baboon scats were sighted, and around 10:15 some impala tracks. They're really faint and difficult for me to see the impala tracks, and they were also there's just goat tracks everywhere. Forgot to mention that just before leaving, just before the second group, the group of two guys met up with us at the rocks, a bunch of them started to drink from the water, so lying on their stomachs, sticking their head into the hole, the freshly dug hole, or redug hole, and drinking water out of there. Then we headed out around 10:15, and like I said, we came into some baboon tracks, and then some impala tracks that were really hard to see, and the sky opened up, and I saw the bright white strip of the Lake Eyasi in the distance, to the west, and so that was really cool and dramatic, and I don't think I had seen it yet, and it also helped me get a better understanding of where we are. So I was kind of surprised that it was to the west of us. I guess not. That makes that, well, yeah, I'm kind of surprised about the location of it. I sort of thought that I was on oh no, I guess I understand which side it's on, but anyways, saw that, and also at the same time, Habari, around the same time, looked up and saw a group of pelicans, a big group of pelicans cruising around in circles to gain altitude, and could actually hear the wind blowing through their feathers, making a sound even though they're really high up above. But it's a pattern that I've seen over the last couple days of the pelicans coming through. And then around 10:24, we walked under a baobab, and a bunch of them started throwing rocks and branches to knock them down, but there weren't very many low-hanging ones on there, so I gave up. But it just reminds one that people in the countryside here get a lot of practice throwing. The herdsmen also throw rocks a lot to keep their herd sort of in track, or to punish animals that were like flying out of the way too much. Interesting to think about that. There was a big acacia tree nearby that had a bunch of sticks on top of it that you can see people had used to throw at the baobab and had gotten stuck on top of this tree. So we snacked on baobab, and then 10:36, back on the road, moving again. One idea I had at that time was to do some type of plant expeditions or seeds collecting expeditions for OAEC, and to get like actual permits and stuff for bringing germplasm back to the U.S. For the purpose of bringing it to OAEC and trialing it there, and just using social media as a way to create that tell that story and bring in more customers for the plant sales. Anyways, that was an idea that I had at that time. Around 10:40, some bush babies were spotted up in acacias, and all the guys started throwing rocks at them. And the head guy was waiting for a good shot. And so one thing that's interesting to notice about how they manage the hunting of the bush babies is that there's two different types of trees right next to each other in this example, and one is the hooked thorn acacia, the wait a bit acacia, and in the top of that is where this bush baby was sleeping out the day, and so it must have some sense of security in there, and it's a very brushy, sort of thick tree where you can't take arrow shots, and also most animals aren't going to climb up into there. Not sure how the bush babies manage it in those trees, but so they try to, with rocks, they try to scare it out of that acacia, and then right next door was this acacia with long spines that is open enough for a shot. So they're throwing rocks, and the thing seems to understand that it's vulnerable if it goes into that other acacia, but they chased it, eventually got it into there, and then every time that it goes into there, everybody basically sets up for a shot and starts shooting from below at it. And so right around 10:47, someone, I'm not sure exactly who it was, blasted it with an arrow, and it literally flew up out of the tree. And then there was multiple follow-up shots, and one guy had to climb up into the tree to actually retrieve it. Luckily, it was in the long-thorned acacia, not the hooked one at this point. And another guy in the group had already gotten one, and so it was just pretty impressive to see, like, I mean, especially with this super cute prosimian primate, to just kind of feel the sense of a sort of charged word to use would be cruelty in the treatment of the animals. A lot of times these shots are non-fatal, and so you end up with these animals that are severely injured, and a lot of times they don't dispatch them, but instead they like break the legs of them and then stick it into their belt and carry it that way. So that was done to this bush baby that had already been, hit by multiple arrows, and none of them fatal. Fatal yet, at least. And so just this thing with these huge eyes, looks like some kind of kid's teddy bear stuffed animal, and definitely made me reflect. I'm pretty callous, I think, when it comes to watching animals killed, but I think that this was just a little bit beyond that, and also yesterday with the hawk. And so interesting to just reflect on my own personal feelings, but also being in a situation where I'm trying to be a little bit culturally relativistic and not imposing my values onto the situation, but also wanting to kind of feel okay about myself. And just it makes me want to expand on the subject a little bit more. Maybe I will, as far as like what we think of as cruelty and the individual, and also like the things that we have qualms about in my society, being cruel to an individual organism compared to how easily we are cruel to entire ecosystems, or to the future sustainability of ecosystems. And also, just another thing I think that I was reflecting on this morning during our motorcycle ride is that life is cheap in the tropics, and plants grow faster, animals reproduce faster, there's more different kinds of animals, more things are dying, biological processes occur faster, there's more types of parasites, there's more types of predators, and in general, I think that the value for an individual life is a smaller value than in modern Western, Northern countries or European countries, or countries where the technology has insulated us from nature more and more. We have come to value individual lives more and more. I think there's a correlation there, and it's interesting to reflect on that, because these guys don't at all seem to be sadistic, I would say, in their treatment of animals. And so yeah, anyways, something to look into a little bit more, but also just for the moment to reflect on my own feelings about it. Another thing I was reflecting on as we walked is baobab fruit for the road, how they often carry a pod with them and sort of snack on it as they're walking, and seed dispersal. So that way of snacking on baobab seems like a good way for the baobab seeds to get spread around and spit out in different places. Not sure if they make it that way or if they need to get pooped out, but does seem like a strategy for seed dispersal. 11 o'clock, there's lots more of those dry berry plants. I forget the name, the epe imbe or whatever, kept going. And let's see. One thing I was reflecting on around that time was just the idea of actually designing ecosystems for foraging, where plant species are selected for or designed specifically to allow for this sort of hunter-gatherer lifestyle of cruising around the landscape, picking berries, killing birds, and catching other sources of animal protein while just picking up plant food along the way, and easy plant food. And also, a lot of the plant food here is a lot of the fruit, for example, at least this time of year, are these dry fruit that probably can sit on the plant they can sit on the plant for days. It's not like, for example, some of my peaches at home that when they ripen, they need to be all used within like a week or less, or else they're no good. But I think a lot of these dried berries that I've been seeing, at least the 3 different types that I've been seeing, and the baobab also, are fruit that seem like they could sit in their current state for a really long time without going bad. Maybe there will be some loss to animals and insects, but for the most part they stay good. So how could an ecosystem be designed, like in a permaculture system, maybe the further out zones, to have lots of food sources to be used in this sort of extensive hunter-gatherer style of way? And I think that's actually something that I would like to focus on more in the future and study more in the future. And I think that it's something that's understudied, and it's something that a lot of my interests in human ecology and in anthropology and in traditional food production systems has all been sort of pointing me in this direction. And also my interest in the spectrum between hunter-gatherer societies and agricultural society, and finding like the sweet spots on that spectrum, and trying to design systems where maybe the further out zones are these forager zones that are designed for the food being produced in this sort of extensive roving hunter-gatherer style of way, where more wild species are intentionally integrated, wild species that are wild food producing species. So anyways, there's a lot of thoughts about that. We got to a spot where I was like, this path looks familiar, around 11:15, and it turns out we were right behind the camp. So we got back to camp around 11:30, hung out there for a short break. People were snacking on baobab, sharpening an axe and sharpening a machete, and then we headed out for bees around 12 o'clock. So we found this spot where there was another type of stingless bees and another type of stingless bees that makes this tube-like entrance that comes out of a natural cavity. We headed out for the bees after we ate a little bit of, I got to eat a little bit of squirrel and a little bit of dove at the camp. And one thing I was flashing on is just the contrast between where I'm at now and what I've momentarily jokingly deemed the hand sanitizer safari, where it was like me and multiple other people in the group were basically using hand sanitizer every time before we would touch food. And just interesting to see the contrast between that, and we're eating at restaurants and boxed lunches wrapped in plastic with a bunch of other people from Europe and America. And then now on the trip that I'm on now, it's like these guys don't wash their hands. I mean, they have very little water. They do wash their hands every once in a while. Like, I mean, they washed their hands when we went and ate some of that corn stuff, but for all intents and purposes, they don't wash their hands, and, they're constantly, like, either rolling joints to smoke, cutting up dead animals, touching animal poop, making fire, reaching in and grabbing honey out of beehives with their bare hands, eating food off their hands, eating berries. So it's basically, I think there's something to be said for the microbiome diversity having to do with the fact that they touch everything with their hands, and they put feathers in their mouths, when they're working on their bows. They chew up their impala tendon before they wrap their arrows with it, and they straighten their arrows with their teeth. I mean, their arrows are covered in blood from different animals, and they're straightening them with their teeth. And so the spitting on the hands for making the hand drill fire. There's just constant mixing of things that are going to touch the mouth. And so I think, it would be interesting to look at the study about the diversity of the microbiome in these people, especially like in the mouth and the GI system, and how much of that has to do with the judgmental word would be hygiene, and how much has to do with the diet. I mean, I think those two go together. But anyways, we headed out to get honey, and they carried a glowing brand, coal, a pot, an axe, and a panga or machete. They ended up just using the coal for lighting cigarettes because these were stingless bees. So I thought originally they brought it so that they could make some kind of fire to smoke out Apis mellifera, but they weren't. They were some type of stingless bee and a different species from yesterday. So we got to this spot, and we're there for a while, and I did it was a really great opportunity to do nature journaling because we weren't walking very much. We were in the same place for a long time. So I got to draw the whole tree, and a lot of the stages of the process. So I don't think I'm going to expand on it too much, but around 1:30, they got to the harvest, and there was a lot of joking and hand licking and smiling, and just the gift that honey is in this kind of a situation, the extreme source of energy and sugars. And I didn't notice the larvae in this. I think this species and the ones that we ate yesterday, I think they keep the larvae in sort of this separate zone, but the honey and the pollen and the wax were just so delicious, and there was this crunchy brown sugar taste in parts of it, and this extremely powerful floral taste that must be coming from the different nectar sources that they're using right now. And it just had this this incredible, like, bright acacia, fresh kind of flower essence to it. and the pollen was super good too, just big clumps of yellow, dark orange pollen with the great flavor, probably so many B vitamins, and the wax had this sort of bitter taste in it like it did yesterday, so I think there's sort of like a propolis or different resins that they're collecting and putting in there, but really, really tasty. And it was good that we got it around 1:30. The driver was getting pretty impatient to head out, and so luckily waited, and I got to journal the whole thing, and I think it came out pretty good. So today was actually a great day. I really like this group. We left them there. They were gonna get more, but they filled up this pot, or didn't fill it up, but put a bunch in this pot, and we were all eating it together, and just everybody was so happy. The getting honey, just is really a joy, and just the amount of it, the generosity with which they shared it, because I was trying not to eat too much of it or too much of their food in general, because I was just thinking about how, I'm going to come back. First of all, before heading over there, I had a big, huge breakfast with like 5 crepes and eggs and whatever, and 2 cups of tea with sugar and powdered milk that has a lot of calories in it. And then I come back here, eat a big, huge lunch, and so I'm definitely cognizant of the fact that, they're depending on that. And for me, it's sort of like, it's an experience to get a taste that it's not necessary for my subsistence. And so we left them around that time. They were going to go try to get some more honey out of there. And I just really enjoyed today. Got to fill a lot of good pages and got a lot of good notes. Got to taste a lot of things. And I just like this group a lot. And so when we left, I said bye to everyone. And I think this time it was clear that we're not coming back to this group. And so feel a little bit sad about that. Like the head man's really a great guy, and I just enjoyed this group, I think, a lot more. So it'll be interesting tomorrow to go back to the other group. They're a little bit more rambunctious, a little bit more of sort of like a bravado feeling with them, even though I feel like there's some of that with all of the groups, but I think this group, all of the groups that I've seen so far, the 2 groups I've seen so far, but the group that we're going to see tomorrow has it a little bit more. So we'll see, and I'm glad for today. Yeah, it was good.